Welcome to the Braver Women Show. I'm Leanne C. Jones. I'm a therapist and the founder of Braver Women. I teach anxious LGBTQ plus women all over the globe how to stop feeling scared and start showing up courageously with more impact and power. Every episode of the Braver Women podcast is packed with proven actionable strategies and thought-provoking content from a therapeutic perspective that you can implement now. So if you're an LGBTQ plus woman ready to stop letting your emotions run the show, struggling with anxiety, or feeling like you're not enough, this is where we're going to change that. Plus, you'll hear powerful success stories from women in the Braver Breakthrough program, real stories from women who've struggled with everything from self-doubt to coming out and have made massive shifts in their lives, living authentically, following their work with me. Braver Women, I hope you're doing really well. It's good to be back. It's good to record another episode for you just before the end of the new year. And so I wanted to start today and talk to you about when self-help isn't enough, recognizing, giving you some tools, giving you some insights to recognize when to seek professional support. And I'm going to start with asking you, have you ever found yourself wondering why all the self-help books and the podcasts and the techniques and the things that you've tried, have you ever asked yourself, why am I still stuck? Have you spent months or weeks trying to meditate, journal, shifted your mindset, or focused on gratitude, for example, and yet that change never seems to stick? Have you ever asked yourself, why does it feel like no matter what I do or how much effort I put in, something is still missing? Here's what I want you to understand. This is because self-help can only take you so far. And if real healing was as simple as adopting a new morning routine or repeating affirmations or flicking through inspirational quotes on TikTok or Instagram or somewhere like that, then we'd all be free of our deepest struggles, right? But it's not that simple. The wounds that shape our struggles, the anxiety, the self-doubt, the emotional overwhelm, they're not just bad habits that can be reprogrammed with a new mindset shift. They are emotional imprints carried in our nervous system, shaped by lived experiences, many of which we've never had the space to process. Now, don't get me wrong here, self-help is and can be really valuable. It's one of the things that got me started on my journey way before I became a therapist. And it can provide insights, strategies, and a real sense of validation. But know this, it's not designed to reach the root of what holds you back as an individual. Because true healing doesn't happen at the level of thought alone. It happens in the body. It happens in the places where the pain has been stored, in the places where survival instincts were formed. And that's why self-help alone so often falls short. And it's why therapy becomes essential, not because you need to be fixed, but because you need a safe space to grow deeper, to understand why some of your patterns that are blocking you moving forward are existing in the first place, and to find the right support to work through them at a level beyond thought that self-help simply can't reach. And the moment you recognize that your struggles are not just a failure of willpower, but a reflection of deeper wounds, is the moment you've outgrown self-help alone. It's a sign that it's time to stop trying to solve it all on your own. So before we dive into today's episode, I want to follow up on what I promised in episode 5, the previous episode before this one. In that episode, we explored tools for self-change, emotional growth, and healing. And I told you that I'd be back with a deeper conversation, one that goes beyond giving you tools and strategies into the reality of actually when self-help just isn't enough. And I think it would be remiss of me as a therapist to give you that episode and continue to give you lots of content that's focused on self-help and change without actually letting you know when it's time to put your hand up and say, self-help just isn't enough. And I need to recognize and understand when this isn't going to work. And so that's precisely what I'm going to be doing for you today. This episode is a follow-up. It's that follow-up that I've promised from episode 5. So if you haven't listened to episode 5, by the way, I recommend that you go back to it after this. But today I'm going to be focusing on giving you 10 signs that self-help isn't enough. 10 signs that I've observed with my own clients as well when they come to me for a consultation. And also how to recognize when it's time to reach out for professional support. When you feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall, or it's just something's not working, or it's not sticking, or you can't keep doing a strategy that's just leading you in a loop of back where you started. And we're going to cover what self-help is, what it's really great for, where it has its limits, and why therapy isn't just about fixing something. It's about allowing you to finally heal at a much deeper level. Now, if you ever questioned whether what you're doing is enough or whether you need to go further, then this episode is especially for you. So let's get into it. And we're going to start with why self-help isn't the whole solution. So self-help is like gathering a collection of tools, right? You learn techniques, you learn insights and the strategies, but having a toolbox doesn't mean that you automatically know how to repair the foundation of a house that's been cracked for years, for example. And that's what many of you are dealing with, not minor cracks, but deep foundational fractures formed by years of conditioning, emotional neglect, trauma, or the chronic experience of being told directly or indirectly that who you are is not enough. For queer women, these fractures, they're not just personal, they are deeply woven into the social fabric that we all navigate daily. Many of us have spent years being told, or many of us have spent years learning how to mold and fit ourselves into spaces that weren't built for us in mind. And self-help might encourage you to just be yourself. But what happens when the very idea of who you are has been shaped by years of internalized shame that perhaps you're not even aware of? Could be by microaggressions, by systemic barriers that tell you subtly and overtly, by the way, that you have to prove your worth just to exist comfortably in certain spaces. Self-help doesn't address that reality. And I don't think that self-help resources out there really speak to people from my minority groups, not least LGBTQ plus women. And this is one of the inspirations behind Brave Women, is that when I was learning how to fix my own journey, I really needed and wanted to have a role model. I wanted somebody to look up to, somebody who got it, somebody who understood the experiences that I had as a gay woman. But there was nothing there. And so when I decided to become a therapist, I thought, who can I help? Who am I going to resonate with? And I thought, I'm going to help people like me. There must be other women out there, other gay women, other queer women who've had all of what I'm mentioning to you so far. And even I noticed back then, I'd go to Waterstones or I'd go to a bookshop or wherever, look online at the time, and I could not find any literature or anything that spoke to me, my deep and my own unique experiences as an LGBTQ plus woman. And I think that has not changed. Like I said, I don't believe that there's anybody out there that is producing content that's seen on a global scale for LGBT women. And from what I can see, and I don't know how you feel about it, I think that the self-help industry, it really assumes a level playing field that doesn't exist. And I think here's why. It's easy, isn't it, to choose happiness when you haven't spent years being told that your identity makes you other. It's easy to shift your mindset when you haven't been carrying the emotional weight of trying to be palatable, acceptable, or digestible to the people around you by what you wear or how you present or how you have your hair cut or stuff like that, stuff that we get as a community. But for those of us who have had to navigate rejection from family, the fear of being misunderstood, the constant questioning of our validity in workplaces, for example, healthcare settings or social spaces, self-help can feel painfully inadequate. It offers a set of strategies without acknowledging the deep reality that some of us have had to learn like shrink ourselves just to stay safe, or to change our appearance to fit in when that's not really who we are, and all of our authenticity completely compromised. Self-help just doesn't recognize that, in my opinion. But what self-help often overlooks is that healing isn't just about changing how we think. It's about recognizing how the world has shaped the way we see ourselves. If you've grown up receiving the message through looks, words, or exclusion that you don't belong, then no amount of positive affirmations can undo any of that without the deeper relational healing, because that wound wasn't created in isolation. It was created in relationship with caregivers, with communities, with society at large. And it means that it needs to be healed in relationship too. So when self-help doesn't work, it's not because you're failing at it. I want to point that out. It's not because you're failing at it. It's not because you're lazy. It's because the work that needs to happen is way deeper than a mindset shift. It's about unraveling years of conditioning and giving yourself the space to process what has been left unprocessed for too long. It's about understanding that healing isn't about forcing yourself to fit into a model that wasn't designed for you. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself that the world has tried to erase. And the other thing is, self-help, it doesn't talk back. And here's how I see it. The biggest limitation of self-help is it doesn't talk back. It can't sit with you and say, hey, I see what's happening underneath this pattern. It can't notice the way that your body tenses when you talk about certain experiences, or the way your voice shifts when you touch on something painful. It can't reflect back to you the subconscious beliefs that drive your behaviors, the survival strategies that you've been using without even realizing it. And I know this firsthand because I tried everything to fix myself before I understood what real healing required. I remember being in my early 20s, and I was living in London at the time, in East London. And that's when everything came down on me like a ton of bricks. Everything. It was like one of the first times that I'd been away from home for a significant period. And it felt like I was wearing a mask everywhere I went. On the outside, I looked and appeared like I had it together. But inside, I was riddled with anxiety, loads of self-doubt, just didn't trust myself. Would only feel okay if I was getting a thumbs up from other people outside of me. I never knew how to have that relationship on the inside with myself, constantly looking for external validation, because that's the pattern that I learned to survive growing up. And I just had this constant feeling that I wasn't enough. And it really felt like I was acting my way through social situations, deflecting with humor, trying to be a joker, over-explaining myself all the time, trying to overwork and read people's reactions and adjust myself accordingly, just to avoid the discomfort of feeling judged, and expecting to be judged all the time because I've always had my hair short. And even back then, I was very, very... my hair was really, really short compared to everybody else around me, and so I stuck out like a sore thumb. But I just couldn't have it long. I couldn't wear my hair long. It didn't feel right to me, and so I was constantly expecting to be judged, because I was judged all the time growing up. And so what you are hurt by, you tend to notice more of. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is to help you understand there isn't a day that goes by where I don't speak to a client that tells me that they've had such similar experiences. And it's really interesting to see how similar it is across the board. And I didn't realize it at the time. I was carrying a lifetime of internalized shame about being different. The ways I dressed, the ways I moved, the spaces I felt comfortable in or didn't. I'd learned to navigate all of it based on an invisible rule book that told me to stay small, to fit in, to not be too much, and to make myself acceptable. And so I did what so many people do. I did what you're doing right now. I tried to think my way out of it. So I bought self-help books. I did affirmations. I practiced every confidence boosting strategy that I could find. I ended up flicking, in fact, I've still got it on my bookshelf now, a book by an American self-help guru called Brian Tracy, flicking through. And when I look at that now, I do roll my eyeballs a bit when I see how superficial it is. And every strategy I could find, I got my hands on, and I even tried hypnotherapy CDs, the irony of that being a hypnotherapist now. And I was convinced that this would be the thing that finally helped me change. This would be the thing that changed me. But guess what? Nothing worked. And looking back, it's obvious why. Because I was trying to think my way out of something that wasn't even intellectual. And the real issue, my nervous system was stuck in a state of survival, and my self-worth had been shaped by years of messages that told me that I wasn't enough. And until I worked through all of that, until I processed those emotions in a safe space, nothing was going to change in a real lasting way. This is why therapy is necessary, not because you aren't strong enough to do the work on your own, but because some of the most important work can only be done in relationship. No one is an island, right? Healing is not a solo journey. And if you're stuck in cycles of anxiety, cycles of self-doubt, or emotional overwhelm, it's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because real change happens in the spaces where we feel safe enough to be truly seen. So let's talk about when you need more than self-help. And if you're listening to this, you might be wondering, well, is self-help enough for me? Or is it time to go deeper? I'm not sure. So ask yourself, have I been struggling with the same patterns, anxiety, low confidence, emotional overwhelm, despite all my efforts to work on it? Do I feel like I understand my problems, but I still don't know how to change them? Have I tried to think my way out of emotional pain only to end up in the same cycle? Am I carrying experiences or emotions that feel too big to process on my own? Have I been relying on self-help as a way to fix myself instead of allowing myself to feel what's underneath? And if any of this resonates with you, these questions, then it might be time to explore what healing looks like way beyond self-help alone. Because here's the truth, you're not failing. If self-help isn't working for you, it's not because you're doing it wrong. And like I've said a moment ago, it's because some things cannot be solved with more knowledge or more strategies. Some things actually require space, safety, and some meaningful and safe connection. And that's what therapy offers. It's not a quick fix. It's not a simple answer, but a space to unravel the layers, to be with what you've been avoiding, and to start truly understanding yourself in a way that allows for real lasting change. And this is the thing, the amount of women that have sat in front of me, and a lot of women come to me as a last resort. And if you listen to the clients' podcasts that I've recorded on this podcast, I've got so many more to come, by the way, but nearly all of them will say that I've tried everything. And what they try to do is come into therapy and not really get to the root of the iceberg that's buried deep down inside of them, that's causing them to feel all this pain, that's causing all of those maladaptive strategies. And it's not until we start to break that iceberg down, some of which they're not even aware of, but all they know is that they can feel something, it feels horrible, and it's causing them to try and protect that in a way that's not serving them. And so once they start to release that, trauma is held in the body. Trauma is what happens inside of you. And everybody's reaction is different. And I think just being able to release some of that allows you to feel better. And when you feel better, then you can start to think straight. And when you can think straight, you can start to make better decisions for yourself, and how you think about yourself, and how you talk to yourself, and how you respond to your emotions, and ultimately how you navigate your life. So I want to get into it. the 10 signs that I've put together for you that self-help isn't enough, things that I've noticed during my consultations with my clients, things that crop up where it's absolutely essential that you recognize that you need professional support with this. And self-help is just, it's not going to cut it in the way that you think just by reading quotes or books or underlining things or highlighting things. Really listen to what I've put together for you here, because some of it will resonate. I know it will. And it'll just give you an opportunity to think differently about what you've been doing so far. And this isn't a hard sell for me, by the way. I'm not trying to sell braver women by doing this. What I am trying to do is come at this from an angle of helping you feel better about yourself and not continue to berate yourself if what you're doing at the moment outside of therapy is not working. It's about keeping you informed and helping you see the big picture rather than just purely self-sabotaging yourself. So the first common sign that self-help might not cut it and therapy could make a real difference for you is, the first one is triggers. When the past is still living in the present. One of the clearest signs that self-help alone won't cut it is when you're constantly being triggered, when old wounds are still dictating your emotional reactions in ways that just feel automatic, overwhelming, or way out of proportion to the situation at hand. And a trigger is, it isn't something that makes you just feel uncomfortable. It's like an emotional landmine. It pulls you straight back into a past version of yourself. One moment you're fine, and then suddenly you're flooded with emotions that feel way bigger than the situation that's happening in front of you. It could be a comment from a friend, a partner, or a particular tone of voice, a look, a specific environment. Anything that can activate an old wound, that old wound. Sometimes it's revisiting family members that can cause you to regress. And I touched on that on a few episodes ago before Christmas. But before you know it, you're reacting from a place of fear, reacting from a place of hurt or defensiveness without fully understanding why. And this is where self-help fails for so many people. Because self-help assumes that if you just change your thoughts, then you'll change your experience, right? We've all heard that. But triggers don't originate in the logical thinking part of your brain. They come from the deeper emotional part, your nervous system, the part that's been wired for survival based on past experiences. The part that has been wired for survival, which has created a template that you're now operating from in the now, a template from the past that you're using to apply to situations in the now. And for queer women, these triggers are often tied to lived experiences of rejection, invisibility, or feeling unsafe in certain spaces. Maybe someone interrupts you in a conversation and suddenly you feel small, unimportant, or completely dismissed. I know that's been one for me in the past. Not because of the one-off interruption, but because it taps into a lifetime of being talked over, ignored, or made to feel that your voice doesn't matter. Maybe someone questions your identity, even subtly, and it sends you spiraling off into self-doubt, not because of that one question, but because it echoes every moment you've had to justify your existence or prove your worth. Triggers are powerful because they bypass logic. You know rationally that not every raised voice means danger, that not every moment of exclusion means that you're fundamentally unworthy, but your body and your emotions don't respond to logic. They respond to history. So they respond to patterns, to the stored imprints of past experiences that haven't been fully processed. And this is why therapy is crucial, because self-help teaches you how to think differently, but therapy helps you to feel differently. It helps you to understand what your triggers are really about, where they originated, and most importantly, how to work through them so they no longer have power over you. So if you find yourself in cycles where you keep getting, let's call it emotionally hijacked, where certain interactions leave you shaken in ways that you can't control, well, that's a sign that deeper healing is needed. You don't need another self-help book telling you just to let it go. You need a safe space to finally process the wounds that are running the show from underneath the surface. So the second sign that I think is a really good indicator as to when self-help is not going to cut it and you need something deeper is something very, very common. And I wonder if this resonates with you. A lack of sense of self. And what this sounds like is, I feel like I don't know myself. And I hear this all the time. I don't know myself. I don't even know what I like or what I don't like. I feel like I'm just acting, trying to fit in and be liked. I don't really know my personality. External validation is really important to me, and I don't know who I am without it. If that resonates with you, I want you to understand something. It's not as simple as journaling your likes or dislikes to get over this, or making a list of your strengths or weaknesses as self-help might suggest. That's just scratching the surface. In my experience, this struggle often sounds more like, I've taken on a way of being to help me survive. This is the reality, right? I've taken on a way of being to help me survive, whether it was growing up with critical caregivers who invalidated my emotions, learning to stay small in unsafe environments, or adapting to emotional neglect where I felt unseen, unheard, or unimportant. And now that you no longer have to shape yourself in those ways or change yourself in those ways or adapt, there's a void. Who you are, or who are you outside of that survival mode? How do you trust yourself when you spent years outsourcing your sense of worth to external validation? And it's not that you fail to find yourself, it's that you were never given the space to develop a sense of self in the first place. And instead, your sense of identity was built on monitoring your surroundings, modifying your behavior, and making sure that everything outside of you looked okay. Because if everything outside of you was fine, then maybe, just maybe, you would feel okay too. But here's the thing. Self-help relies on there being a self to help. And if you feel lost, if you feel out of place, or you feel like you don't know who you are, self-help is going to feel like trying to build a house without a blueprint. And I had a client once, and in fact, I have many clients like this, right? This particular client, she had spent years people-pleasing at work, real high up in management. And she was bending over backwards to be liked, or avoiding difficult decisions, and constantly shaping and reshaping herself to make herself agreeable from the top up, with management above her and her staff that she was managing below her. And over time, she just realized that she had no idea what she actually wanted. She spent so long making sure that everyone else was happy that she lost touch with herself entirely. And the worst part, that pattern showed in every aspect of her life. And she kept getting overlooked for promotion because she was just so afraid of asserting herself. And she felt completely ineffective, powerless, and stuck in a cycle of, see, no one respects me, so therefore I'm not good enough. The meaning is, well, I'm clearly not good enough. And she tried every self-help method, affirmations, goal setting, gratitude journals, you name it, she tried it. But all it did was just highlight how disconnected that she felt. Because the truth is, if you don't have a solid sense of identity, self-help strategies can only go so far. And so for many queer women, this sense of self-loss is layered with years of feeling like I'm an outsider. You might have spent your life adjusting to different situations, presenting different versions of yourself to different people, one version at work, another with family, another with friends. Maybe you grew up without visible queer role models, or you learn to mask certain aspects of yourself to avoid rejection. And now, as an adult, you don't just struggle with identity, you struggle with trusting yourself. trusting yourself to define your own identity and your own terms. If you've grown up in an environment where your caregivers were unreliable or invalidating, then you might have learned that the world itself is completely unpredictable. And if the world feels unreliable, you don't develop a stable sense of self. You don't develop a stable base on the inside either. Instead, what you do is you adapt, you mold yourself to others, you chase external validation because it feels safer than learning to trust your own instincts. And this can manifest in so many different ways. It can manifest in relationships, and it sounds like, well, I don't know who I am outside of relationships, that codependency. I feel like I disappear into my partner. I can't tolerate being on my own. I'm scared of being on my own. Another one that I get quite frequently is in low self-esteem. I don't know how to value myself, so I focus on what other people think of me instead. And if they're happy, then that makes me feel happy. And lastly, another common one in my practice is in unresolved trauma. And they don't necessarily realize this, but what it is outside of that is I don't know who I am without my coping mechanisms. So therapy can help you release the trauma of these experiences so that you can feel empowered to step into who you truly are. And I know that sounds cheesy, doesn't it? But it helps you to feel empowered to be authentic, to be who you are without fear, without shame, without relying on external validation to determine your worth. You can be driving your own bus, driving your own journey, deciding on what you think, and having that clarity and that self-trust, trusting that clarity on the inside. So uncovering your core identity, it isn't just about finding yourself, it's about reclaiming the self you were never given a chance to fully become. So therapy helps you to unravel the conditioning that shaped you so that you can rebuild a sense of self that is really you, that feels like you, that's rooted, that's stable, and that is really authentically yours. And the feedback that I get when I do the exit session from my program is I feel like myself again. And that's just an incredible thing to hear. And I normally follow that up with, how do you know what yourself feels like if you've never felt like yourself? And my clients normally answer with, I just feel like me. I feel like I'm not doubting myself. I feel like me. And that's incredible. So let's move on to the next sign. Sign number 3 is if you have maladaptive coping strategies. And what I mean when I say maladaptive is trauma, shame, or discrimination. It can lead to coping mechanisms that sabotage your progress and affect your sense of identity. For example, you might label yourself as an anxious person, or I am an anxious person, rather than recognizing that you learn to think that way due to past experiences. I am an anxious person means that label is going to be a tough one to undo. I am an anxious person is very different from I'm a person who experiences anxiety. When you believe wholeheartedly that you are a person with a label of limitation, then anything you try is going to butt heads with that sense of identity. And therapy helps you to unlearn these thought patterns, these adaptive patterns to illogical thoughts or trapped trauma, so that you can develop ways of relating to yourself from a realistic perspective, rather than just developing coping strategies, because that's what these are. Maladaptive coping strategies, they're just coping strategies that are not doing you any favors. I had a client of mine who described her anxiety as a constant companion. And in therapy, we looked at this narrative, and I helped her to see her anxiety as a learned response that she could manage, rather than just cope with, rather than an unchangeable part of her identity. So if you're someone who says things like, well, my anxiety won't let me, or my depression is part of who I am, then this language gives a real clue as to how embedded your sense of identity is with a problem. And what I want you to recognize is that you are you. The problem that you have is something you experience. It is not who you are, but how you've learned to be as a result of confusing the two. If you have coping strategies such as avoidance, avoiding conflict, avoiding speaking up for yourself, which is really common, isolating yourself, perfectionism, people-pleasing, overworking to prove yourself, persistent self-criticism, codependency, for example, or even social withdrawal, then just know that these are indicators of deeply rooted, unresolved emotional patterns such as shame or fear. These are unconscious behaviors that need to be addressed. These are unconscious responses that are being taken as a result of something much deeper that's going on inside of you. And for queer women, some of these coping mechanisms are just survival adaptations. If you've spent years navigating spaces that weren't safe, learning to keep quiet, to shrink, to not take up space, or to overcompensate by achieving more to prove your worth, those strategies, they don't just disappear because you read a book about self-love, or you found some really inspirational quotes that left you open mouthed. They're not going to shift by doing that alone. You know, the instinct to protect yourself by being perfect, by avoiding conflict, by suppressing your needs, that has been wired into you through experience and repetition. And that's why generalized advice like, oh, just stop people pleasing, or just be confident, or be yourself, that falls flat. I see it all the time. Be who you want to be. Well, that's all well and good, but that advice ignores the fact that your brain has learnt these patterns that I've just highlighted to you as an essential for survival. And to unlearn them, you don't just need a new mindset, you need the right support to gently and safely deconstruct the underlying emotional wiring there. And that's when it's time to seek professional help. So the fourth sign is struggling to apply knowledge. And I hear this all the time. And so you've read all the books, you've watched all the videos, and intellectually, at an intellectual level, a logical level, you totally get it. But you can't seem to implement what you've learned from these books, from these TikTok videos, from these Instagram posts. You can't implement it. And this is one of the biggest frustrations I hear from clients. I understand the problem. I even understand what I need to do. But how do I actually stop people pleasing? How do I just stop that behavior? How do I turn off the feeling or the compulsion to do it? This is what they tell me in their initial consultations with me. And most clients who come to me have been trying self-help for years. And it can leave them in a state of just feeling helpless and inadequate. And I think this is where self-help really falls short. It often operates under the assumption that if you just do A and B, then it's going to take you to C. But human behavior isn't that linear. Change isn't a simple formula. I wish it was, but it's a deeply personal formula. It's a deeply personal pattern that's been formed over time, and it requires understanding why a behavior exists in the first place before you can begin to unravel that knot and unlearn it and take it out of your mental and emotional landscape. So mindfulness, that's widely recommended, isn't it, as a strategy for reducing stress. But for some people, the very act of sitting still and being present with themselves triggers anxiety. Why? Because their nervous system has been wired for hypervigilance. And this is so common with queer women. If you spent your life on edge, constantly monitoring your surroundings for safety, whether from childhood instability, social rejection, or past discrimination, then mindfulness can feel unbearable at first. And the issue is, it's not that you're bad at mindfulness. It isn't that. There's a deeper resistance that needs to be addressed first. And therapy helps you uncover why those blocks exist and how to navigate them. Another example, telling a queer woman who spent her whole life adapting to heteronormative expectations, for example, to just love herself more. It doesn't address the deep-seated feelings of unworthiness or the past experiences that shaped her self-view. This is why self-help techniques, no matter how insightful, they often fail because they don't account for the why behind the struggle. Therapy, however, it's an interactive process. Well, it is for me and my clients anyway. It's very coactive, where someone can work with you to understand your personal barriers and help you implement change in a way that actually works for you, rather than just getting all the theory and doing all the nodding of the head. And if you're struggling to apply the knowledge that you've gathered, it's not because you're failing, it's because you need more than that information. You need a process of integration. You need to learn the how. You need to know the how. You need to be mentored. You need to be guided. And you need a deeper understanding of your own unique patterns and why that's taking place. That self-awareness, that self-understanding. And that is where therapy really makes the difference, because it's coming from an unbiased perspective rather than you using the lens, to the same lens that you're criticizing yourself inaccurately is the same lens that you're using to try and undo it on your own. And that's not going to work. So the next sign is awareness without action. Speaking of awareness, let's go into this one. Awareness without action. So awareness is the first step, but it's not enough on its own. Many people get stuck here in this place, understanding their trauma, recognizing their unhealthy patterns, even knowing what they need to change, but still not being able to break free from the cycle. And in my opinion, I think therapy bridges that gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it. It offers structure. It offers accountability and repetition, things that self-help by its very nature cannot provide. It's one thing to intellectually understand a problem, but it's another thing to entirely shift the emotional and behavioral patterns that keep it in place. For example, you might not know that you're a chronic people pleaser because you were raised in an environment where love was conditional. Maybe you even understand that this tendency is causing you to overextend yourself, avoid conflict, or you lose yourself in relationships. But simply knowing this, that doesn't automatically mean that you can stop that behavior. And this is where therapy comes in. A therapist helps you to turn insight into action, not just through advice, but through deeper exploration of why certain patterns exist, why certain patterns persist even, and practical strategies to interrupt them in real time. Therapy is that space where you refine and reinforce new behaviors. And that's what I really focus on with my clients, where you can learn to tolerate the discomfort of change in a way that self-help can't teach you. You have that deeper support. And think of it like this: you wouldn't expect to master a sport just by reading about it, would you? Understanding the rules of the game isn't the same as stepping into the field and actually playing. And therapy is where you practice new ways of being in a really supportive environment, so that when you step back into your real life challenges, you have the emotional muscle. You've created that emotional muscle memory to handle things differently. And that's why this is a sign. If you find yourself stuck in a cycle of knowing but not doing, if you're constantly saying things like, well, I know I should set boundaries, but I can't do it, and it doesn't feel right, or I know I need to stop seeking validation, but I don't know how, then self-help is just not going to cut it. You don't need more information. You need support in actually implementing it. So the next sign is lack of supportive relationships. And this is really unique, I think, to women in our community. If you don't have people around you who can offer unbiased support, then therapy can fill that gap. Healing does not happen in isolation. Like I said earlier, nobody is an island, but there's a lot of queer women who are very much on their own in this world. You know, you hear the phrase, don't you? We're wired for connection, and we're wired for communication. And when we lack safe and supportive relationships, our struggles, it can feel so much heavier. It can feel so much harder. But many queer women, for many of us, societal pressures, discrimination and stigma make it difficult to find genuinely affirming places. LGBTQ plus gay bars are closing down. Where do you go? The only safe spaces appear to be, well, I'm not sure if I'm not sure if I would call them safe, but online spaces. I don't know about you, but I'm seeing a distinct lack of visible community. And I really don't think that we don't have the same experience, do we? It's not as if you go out and about and you're bumping into loads of the queer people. You're not. And it can feel very, very isolating. And I feel a sadness knowing that visibly represented queer places are on the decline. And family dynamics can be complicated. Friendships can feel conditional sometimes, can't they? And even within the queer community, experiences can vary widely, leaving some feeling like they don't belong anywhere. And this loneliness just compounds emotional distress, just reinforcing the idea that you have to figure it all out on your own. You have to learn to be by yourself. And that's just not true. The therapy offers a space where you don't have to filter yourself, where you can be fully seen, you can be heard, you can be validated. And it's a place where your experience are not just acknowledged, but understood. And I think having a therapist who can hold space for your emotions without judgment allows you to process them in a way that self-help or talking to your friends just can't provide. So moving on, the next sign is planning but paralyzed. And what I mean when I say this is, do you make plans for change but feel too overwhelmed to take that first step? You know exactly what needs to be done. You've mapped out the steps, you've made the list, you've set the deadlines, but when it comes down to the act, you freeze. And that weight of execution, it just feels heavy. So that it's easier to do nothing at all, isn't it? It's easier just to do nothing at all. So let me ask you, if that's familiar to you, then this is where therapy is going to make all the difference. Self-help is not going to cut it, because it becomes self-help is optional, isn't it? When you're engaged in a therapy process, a therapist doesn't just help you plan change, but they help you move through the internal resistance that's keeping you stuck, that freeze mode. It's not just about breaking down goals into smaller steps. It's about understanding why taking those steps feels so daunting in the first place. So for many, this paralysis, it's not about laziness, and it's not about lack of willpower. It's not about lack of focus. It's a nervous system response. If past experiences have taught you that mistakes lead to punishment, for example, that failure means rejection, or that standing out in any way puts you at risk, then your body has learned to associate taking action with danger. And you don't get a say in that response at the moment, but therapy helps you to unpack these underlying fears, bringing them to light so that they don't continue to dictate your choices. They don't continue to have an impact on you, and you can see it for what it is. You can recognize when it's happening, and then you know how to respond. You have a plan. You know what you're going to do when that response comes in. I've had clients who've come to me with really detailed, well thought out plans. And they've talked to me about this in the consultation phase. And they've talked to me about things that they've tried in the past, but they felt really incapable of following through. And how I see it and what I've experienced so far is this is one of the main reasons why. And during the process, as we've moved through their program, we've explored what's going on beneath the surface, that fear of failure, that fear of visibility, that fear of rejection, the deeply ingrained belief that success isn't for people like me, or I don't deserve it. And once we've addressed those emotional roadblocks, and I mean really addressed them, unpicked them, walked around them, upside down, inside out, back to front, we absolutely know what's at play, then they're able to move forward with confidence. They no longer feel hostage by those feelings or those unconscious fears. And self-help, it often assumes that, well, if you just have the right strategy, then you'll just push forward, won't you? But therapy recognizes that strategy without emotional readiness, it leads to stagnation. And if you find yourself stuck in an endless cycle of planning and avoiding, then therapy can help you finally start to take action in a way that feels safe, it feels sustainable, and it feels like you have some control. And you can feel empowered from that. So moving on, we're almost at the end. The next one is, and this is really, really common, very common, having a high tolerance for mistreatment and learned helplessness. And I'll explain why I've put these together. If you have a high tolerance for bullshit, if you have a high tolerance for being mistreated, and you feel powerless to do anything about it, you feel stuck, then listening, okay? This is very, very common for one of the reasons why self-help is not going to touch this area for you. When we experience early emotional neglect or criticism, especially from parents or caregivers or family, it can lead to what's called an insecure attachment style. I know some of you will be familiar with that term. And essentially, you might learn to tolerate mistreatment as a way of keeping relationships intact or avoiding the pain of perceived abandonment. And you term it to yourself as abandonment. And this response becomes ingrained, so it can feel normal, even though it's damaging. And when you add in a layer of like stress or minority stress or feeling rejected or discriminated or othered because of your sexuality, then it becomes even more complicated. You might internalize that belief that in order to earn your place in relationships or in work or socially amongst your friends, that you have to overcompensate. Now, this was definitely me. You have to overcompensate or hide parts of yourself or accept mistreatment to tick along nicely with everybody else. So you might, ordinarily, you'll be screaming on the inside at how somebody's treating you or how someone's talking to you. But on the outside, you're just letting them get away with it. You're just accepting it because you don't want to have that confrontation because it feels scary, and you don't want to have that pain of being othered or having those feelings reflected back to you. And this is where learned helplessness comes into play, because if you've repeatedly experienced situations like this, for example, and it could be when you were growing up as well, where you weren't allowed to say anything, where speaking up was dangerous, where you would be disciplined in some way, and you learn that actually speaking up, it doesn't change anything, so what's the point? And it could be in your family, in school, or in relationships. You've potentially unconsciously learned that asserting yourself doesn't make a difference. And over time, this can lead to a feeling of just being powerless, just having no impact, just feeling like you have absolutely no power at all to make any changes in your life. And I see this especially where it's a phrase that I used in quite a few podcasts now, particularly the last one, is life is happening to me, not by me. It's just having that zero locus of control. And when you have this, it can make it even harder to break free from unhealthy dynamics. You might find yourself keeping quiet in situations where you do have the power to act. And you stay quiet because deep down you don't believe it's going to change anything. And on top of that, it's just coupled with fear. So this tolerance for mistreatment, it often shows up in ways like people pleasing is a very, very common one. avoiding conflict, and it could be in your relationships as well, just saying nothing just in case they get the hump and decide to disrupt the status quo, and that doesn't feel safe for you to go through that, to have that necessary confrontation or that necessary healthy conflict. It could be, it could show up in ways like numbing emotional pain to maintain the illusion of harmony. So with all of that together, what's really happening here is a disconnect between your true self and the survival-driven behaviors that you've adopted. So over time, you might become used to pushing aside your own needs, that you no longer recognize when something isn't right for you. This is often what I see when people say they have a tolerance for bullshit, which on a deeper level can also be linked to hypervigilance. You, out of awareness, might find yourself constantly monitoring that environment, looking for potential conflict or rejection in order to avoid triggering that old pain. But here's the thing, changing these patterns, it requires way more than just learning how to say no or how to set boundaries or how to assert yourself. It requires addressing the core ideas that are sustaining those behaviors, those beliefs, that your system of beliefs, that filter, that lens that you are using as a template on how to live your life, how you perceive things, how you understand things, how you receive the world. And you might believe things like, well, my needs don't matter, or if I stand up for myself, then I'm going to lose people. We need to start there by examining those very ideas, and we need to work on building your self-compassion, and also take a look at how early relationships have shaped the way that you approach your own emotional needs. So you can have that awareness and start to see and slowly undo those knots, those protective knots that have been formed over time. And those protective knots that lead to that high tolerance for mistreatment, for other people treating you in a way that you would never treat anybody else. So if you are in a high tolerance, if you resonate with this, then I wonder if you're able to just be honest with yourself and realize that there may be something underneath the surface that is keeping this in place. And so this could be the reason why self-help is not helping you. In fact, it's reflecting back this powerlessness, this limited idea that you have about yourself. So it's really important just to bear that in mind. And lastly, just to finish here, if you have persistent symptoms, and I think that if you have any of the following, it could be a sign that something deeper needs attention. So it could be that you're feeling anxious or overwhelmed. It could be that you're really overthinking, and you're having not just overthinking, but you're having difficulty switching off. You don't know how to switch off or disengage from that mental chatter. It could be that you have low mood or tearfulness without a clear cause. Could be irritability or difficulty relating to yourself, difficulty being able to respond helpfully to your emotions. If you notice that you've got changes in your sleep or eating habits, or you're just avoiding social activities or losing interest in hobbies, then I think that's definitely a sign that therapy is going to be a far more effective strategy for you than trying to read about it, trying to use that logical part of your mind to outthink something that's happening way below the surface. So I hope that the examples that I've given you, I hope that the indicators or the concept or the signs that I've talked to you about have resonated. I hope that it's helped you feel seen, feel validated, and understand that if something's not working for you, then there's likely to be a deeper reason why, and it doesn't boil down to you being ineffective or incompetent at creating change in your life. It's just helping you to have that wider awareness, the bigger picture, and understand that sometimes it's okay. And you don't always have to wait until you've hit rock bottom to put your hand up and say, self-help can only take me so far, but I realize that this is not going to help me, and I actually need to engage in something a bit more productive, that's going to support me, that's going to take me further to where I want to be. So let's wrap this episode up today. So I want to say, just again, self-help can be a fantastic tool, but it's not a substitute for professional guidance. It can offer insight, it can offer strategies, it can spark awareness, but therapy is what allows you to go deeper, to move beyond just coping and into actually healing. It isn't about fixing problems. It's about understanding yourself at a fundamental level. It's about uncovering the emotional patterns that are running the show, and finally gaining the freedom to actually live the life that you want, to exist and to express yourself in the way that you want, rather than the one fear or conditioning has kept you stuck in. If you've been feeling stuck, or if you've tried all the things and nothing seems to be shifting, then perhaps it's time to try a different approach, because you deserve more than surface level fixes. You deserve healing that lasts. You deserve to feel safe, to feel seen, to feel integrated and whole. And therapy provides you with a space where you can experience transformation in a real embodied way. And I hope that you continue to listen to this podcast, because I have a number of episodes this year to share with you, all from clients who've worked with me, all from clients who have started from this position of dipping their toes in with self-help, but realizing that there's another side to the coin here, and this side is not cutting it. You know, I had one of my clients say to me last month when we finished working together, you know, I spent years thinking I needed to just work harder at self-help. She said to me, I needed someone to help me feel safe enough to change. And that's the key, because transformation, it's not an overnight job, and it absolutely doesn't come from forcing change. And you'll hear more about that in episode 5, the episode before this. I don't need to labor that point. But it comes from creating the right conditions for change to happen. That's really, really important. So if this episode resonated with you, share it with someone. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And I look forward to catching up with you in the next episode. If you have a question that you want me to cover, or you want to connect with me, then head along to the Braver Women Facebook community. That's where all the good stuff is. That's where, ironically, there's a small self-help library that I've put together for you, where you can read some of the content, you can have a look at some of the discussions that we've had, and you can decide whether you need something additional. You can always reach out to me. Again, I will put my contact in the show notes, and I look forward to hearing from you soon. Remember, being brave isn't about being fearless. It's about taking the next step forward, even when fear is present. There's small incremental changes that lead to lasting results over time. So the question is, what's your next step? Take care. Bye for now.